Barrett, I'm going to ask you a more specific question here. I think it's pretty well accepted that seed trains are an area ripe for process automation and bio. The manual intervention required for cell cultivation and transfer from vials to shake flask to stirred tank bioreactors and so on, it introduces a whole lot of inefficiency and room for error. So give us a snapshot of where we are as an industry in the evolution from that to higher output and more automated solutions.
You know, I'm really glad you mentioned this because this was my world for many years. We all know what it's like to scale cells up and how long it takes, right? And how many things could possibly go wrong in that process. I know nowadays, and we were getting into it a little bit when I was still back, you know, wearing a white lab coat, is, you know, we would bank. I think one of the first easy opportunities is when you're doing these continuous, at least upstream, you know, you're basically, there's a step in that where you're retaining cells, and we would bank from those very concentrated cell return lines. And so we would do these, you know, at the time, 50 to 100 mil aliquot banks, but now they're doing all the way up to 2 liters in these little flat bags. And so they would do this very, very high cell density cell bank, blast freeze it, and then now you could just thaw that and inoculate your bioreactor. So that saves weeks of time. So that's one thing that can be done. Additionally, you know, I hear of some clients now, they will not have basically a continuous kind of seed train reactor, and it'll just be kept up for about a month. Some people call it a Solera, some people just call it a seed reactor, but it's constantly up and it's being perfused and it's being fed and it's maintained at steady state. So I think that's another really great opportunity, especially if you have these already established, well-established upstream continuous processes. You can just inoculate, and your plant never is really down.
Yeah.
I mean, this assumes that you've characterized your cell lines, right? And their productivity is consistent, right? Over an amount of time, but yeah.
Yeah. I want to take an audience question. We have a 2-part question from Amit that I'm intrigued. And Barrett and Paul, I'm gonna throw this out to either of you. So the question is from Amit: if the data inline online from PAT, process analytical technology, is outside of the specifications during a short part of continuous manufacturing, will there be a concern for the entire production? That's part 1. Part 2, will there be a chance to divert that outlier from the process to avoid overall impact for the product? So it seems like a pretty important question to me.
Yeah, I mean, Barrett, let me take a swing at it. So I'm assuming that, you know, if you've got this implemented and you have your normal operating ranges, you know, your NORs and your PARs already established, you know that when these outliers happen, you already know the impact. So assuming that you know, if you do got a spec for X amount of time, this is something that's already been characterized, and you know what the effects are. So that's step 1. So, you know, I don't think you necessarily need to throw away the batch, but that's something that you will have already had well characterized when you do have these process kind of anomalies. As far as the second part of the question, let me see if I can read it. I think it was, will there be a chance to divert outliers? Theoretically, yes. So if you have, you know, dynamic feedback, you know, if you're doing real-time monitoring, real-time sensors, all that, if there's dynamic feedback, you can, you know, that could trigger an action. You know, if it starts to drift out of range, you can divert, and you could potentially divert that stream into, you know, a kind of a quarantine bag or a quarantine container or something like that. So there's definitely opportunity. Once we have that sort of advancement, you know, again, I'm kind of, this is academically what I would do. You know, if you have that ability to have feedback, then you have that ability to react in real time and keep things moving until that comes back into spec.
Paul, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on that. Otherwise, I'm going to flip the scenario here and ask our first polling question of our audience.
Yeah, I would just build on that. I mean, I think the anomalies that Barrett talked about, I mean, obviously in a perfect world, we know what those anomalies are, and we can then know what the answer or the next step in that anomaly journey would be, right, in most cases. I think everybody on the call would agree with that conceptually.